TV producer,
Well,
director.
How do you become a television director in the first place, and then go off?
Let me start off by telling you how I became a television director. I think that's probably a good start. I worked in BBC Television News as an engineer, an electrical engineer, and because I was quite young, I actually thought, I think I can probably do that job where they actually just talk rather than have to do stuff. And I applied for an attachment. The BBC was great when I started doing it. You could go on for training attachments. You applied if you could prove to the department that you had an interest and they thought you were going to offer something to them, then they would take you on in training, which is how I started doing it. I started working as a director in 1985, in fact, when the 6 o'clock news started, you know, the electronic version, the one with the big voice at the beginning, which said, the 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Sue Lawley and Nicholas Witchell. And I trained at that time. I remember the first time I actually directed the 6 o'clock news as well.
Frightening, huh?
Frightening. I looked up at the clock, it was about 20 to 6, and I looked down at my script, which was mostly blank, and I can remember thinking, what on earth am I doing here? This is completely and utterly scary. Which it is, it's very fast, but it trains you to think really quickly, and trains you that 30 seconds is an awfully long time in broadcasting. You can do lots of things. And that's how I started, and then moved on to various other programs within television news. I was the director that started On the Record. Do you remember On the Record? It was a Sunday lunchtime political program.
Yes, I remember.
Which had the crocodile made out of the Houses of Parliament, and it was set inside Big Ben. And the head of television news at the time was a chap called Ron Neal, who's a very softly spoken Scottish guy. And he said, when he looked at the titles, he said, these are either the worst or the best titles they've ever seen, and I don't know which.
Presumably he'd been down the club, hadn't he?
Yeah. And that's how I started doing it, and then from there moved out of television news, eventually became a freelance, left the BBC and worked on contract, went to ITV, did some children's programs, and moved around and did a lot of things like that. But to get back to your question, how do you become a freelance director today, or producer, I suspect the short answer to that is you need ideas. I think you probably would find it easier than just saying I want to direct or I want to produce, is to actually have something up your sleeve and say, I've got an idea that I would like to produce. And I think in that case, not knowing all that well how to go about it would be less of a problem, because if you've got a vision, you can go to people. There are plenty of experts around, cameramen, studio people, film people, editors, producers, executive producers, who, if you've got a good idea, will actually be able to help you out. So I don't think that having the techniques and the ability, which you would have to have if you simply said, I want to direct and I don't care what it is. I think if you went along with an idea and a vision for something you wanted to produce or direct, put it on telly somewhere, people would help if it was a good idea.
Now, you've raised an issue here that perhaps to some people they're not quite sure of the difference. What is the difference between a television producer and a television director? What is the difference in what they do, if any?
The producer is the person these days who's responsible for putting the whole thing together, really. Will deal with the budgets and booking people, booking artists, shaping the thing. And the director is also involved in that area, so there's a bit of an overlap, but the director's main responsibility is to make it happen. So where it's a multi-camera live program, you would be the person involved with the producer, of course, in designing the way it looks, but at the real sharp end, you be the person that puts the cameras where they go and actually, literally and metaphorically, calls the shots.
Now, working in television news, because I also worked in television news, and I can remember how terribly hairy it was to have a script which was just a load of blank paper, and the news stories are coming on as you're on air. What is the most hairiest program you've worked on, where you've literally come out and your shirt's been sodden wet afterwards?
I think this answer might surprise you. It was The Late Show, the late night arts program. It was remarkably difficult, and news was hard because that's how news was, and that was the expected nature, and it had a form and an infrastructure that was designed for that. So that's, you just got on with it. If there wasn't a story there, or if something happened, you go back to the newsreader, and they'd say, well, we haven't got that story, let's go on to this. So in news, you've got a choice of three things. You've got a newsreader, you've got a graphic, or you've got a taped story of ET, and you go to one of them. And if there isn't one available, you go to some other form, and that was it. And the newsreaders were extremely reliable, so you could simply say to them, the first one I worked with, Sue Lawley, who was this good, you could talk to all the time while she was talking. And you'd simply say what you were preparing and what would happen next, and she would announce it at the appropriate time, and off you'd go. The Late Show was not at all like that. The Late Show was very arty. And I can remember actually instructing BBC Two Network to take us off the air one night because the films weren't available. There were 3 13-minute films in this programme with links, and they didn't turn up, despite the fact that people kept saying, they will be there, they will be there.
Where were they coming from?
Well, coming out of the editing suites, and they weren't finished.
Extraordinary. David, you said at the start that you made the move from engineering.
Yes.
How did you move across? You were quite glib about that. How did you move across from engineering into producing and directing?
Television news was the secret. Television news is a very technical area, more so these days, I think. I've been back to have a look at it, and as I'm a lot older and it's a lot more technical, the gap between the two of us is much larger. But it was a very technical area.